Okay, everyone, welcome to this event introducing the Australian Guide to Choosing an Apartment. Before we begin proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It's upon their ancestral lands that the University of Sydney is built. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm speaking to you from Biddigal land, and I encourage you to add the land from which you're attending in the chat feature. So should you have any questions or comments during today's event, please feel free to put them in the chat feature. You can address them to a particular panel member if you like, and we'll pass them on to the panelists if we don't get through all of them today. In addition, if you'd like to share your own apartment stories, we're really interested to hear them. You can put them in the chat. There'll be a link at the end of the presentation, and we have another function next week where we drill into apartment design more fully, and you may wish to attend that and share your story. I'll now hand you over to Dr. Jasmine Palmer to begin the event.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to everyone for attending this session today. I'm joining you from the land of the Polongaroo or Spinifex people of the Victorian Desert in Western Australia, and pay respect to their elders past and present. The Polongaroo people of Juntujara and Ilpuka are one of the first communities in Australia to realise self-governance of their ancestral lands through native title, and I'm privileged to currently be living and working within community on these lands. It's been a pleasure working with Lisa King and Professor Peter Phibbs on the development of the Your Apartment Home Guide, and also with other academics and practitioners who've contributed, some of whom will be speaking later in the session. So the Henry Halloran Trust of the University of Sydney is presently developing a new guide to help residents find their perfect apartment match. Australian apartments, with a few notable exceptions, continue to be designed and developed as investment assets, with the majority of apartment units owned by landlords seeking rental returns and capital gains. Speculative apartment developers have little, if any, contact with residents. They receive little direct feedback on whether or not their buildings are suitable for the households who want to live in them. The result is a growing stock of apartments sized and designed for maximum financial return, rather than for the particular needs of prospective households. So by identifying their own housing priorities and learning to interpret the differences between apartments, residents can ensure they find the apartment home which best meets their needs. Today we will discuss the intent of this new guide in development and hear from some of the expert contributors. We'll also explain the next steps to be taken in the lead up to the release of the first edition. There will be an opportunity for discussion and questions from the audience, so as Lisa suggested, please put your questions in the Q&A as the presenters are speaking, so Lisa can assist in curating the question session. You could ask, why are we creating yet another guide when there's already design guidelines for apartments in some states and there's more in preparation? Apartment design guidelines, to use a general term, exist in multiple Australian states, and they typically outline aspirational goals and describe generic requirements for room sizes, balcony dimensions, storage spaces, and other aspects of amenity. They speak to designers and developers, not specifically residents, and they set minimum benchmarks which are seldom exceeded in profit-driven apartment developments. Design guidelines inform the development of new dwellings, whereas the guide we're working on, the Your Apartment Home Guide, will assist residents to assess the suitability of both new and existing apartments for their household. This new guide will assist residents in determining which of the apartments available to them is their best match, or at least the closest they can find. So the real estate industry also provides some guidance to purchasers with publications such as inspection checklists. Reviewing these, we found they focus primarily on the materiality of a dwelling for sale, which is of course critical, although it is but one of the many attributes of a home. Being provided by industry, these checklists are not motivated necessarily by the same interests as those of the resident, and they don't really help the future resident understand the functionality of the dwelling and whether or not the building and the apartment design will meet their needs. Some of the checklists observed as part of this project focus almost solely on the quality of finishes and fittings, which are attributes which can be easily altered over the course of a building. They seldom address such issues as orientation, construction, access, or security, all attributes which the resident has little capacity to change over time and which ultimately impact long-term lived experience far more than the bench tops or the features of the oven. So how are we approaching this project? So development of the guide is part of an ongoing action research project which has collected data from multiple sources. We have to date reviewed existing national and international design guidelines, both advisory and mandatory guidelines. And the example here on the screen is from a family-focused design guideline from Toronto in Canada, which is, if anyone's interested, one I highly recommend. We have also looked at existing guides and checklists, as mentioned, for apartment purchases that exist in the Australian context. We've examined marketing material for existing median-priced apartments in 5 Australian cities, compared and contrasted the information available to residents, and attended 40 open inspections in 3 cities, which has been a challenge in 2020 with the situation with open inspections constantly changing. Lisa has also undertaken a typological analysis of apartment plans, identifying common features, both positive and otherwise, in typical apartment designs. In addition, we've collected stories from apartment residents, and I'd just like to share a couple of those with you. So via a media article in May this year, we asked the apartment dwelling public the question, what do you wish you knew before buying your apartment? Now, that question has some slightly negative connotations, suggesting that there were things that went wrong. From the stories shared by residents, we do see a clear cohort of those who found themselves owning or renting an apartment with which they may be partially discontented. This research and the subsequent guide aims to help others avoid the same pitfalls. So at the extreme end of the spectrum was one resident who has now abandoned their bedroom of their dwelling due to unexpected nighttime truck noise. They now sleep in their living room. The lesson from this that this resident provides is beware that agents tend to hold opens at times which show the property in their best light. So visit your potential new home at all times of the day and all days of the week. And this is true of all dwellings, not just apartments. In another building, a downsizing couple known among their social circle as the hosts of regular dinner parties now find themselves without an appropriate space to welcome friends. The lesson? Measure, measure, measure. Many apartments are dressed for showing, sometimes using items of furniture which are at the smaller end of normal. Or even more frequently, in the marketing material, we found floor plans provided by real estate agents showing unfeasibly small furniture, not just at the smaller end, but unrealistic furniture. So when a plan indicates a dining table for 8 in the apartment plans provided by the real estate agent, don't assume that apartment for 8 will fit. Measure. And a final resident story. When moving into what she viewed as her forever home, one resident was told by a neighbour and member of the Strata Management Committee, you can either rehouse that dog or go and live somewhere else. The lesson from this resident, examine the building rules carefully. When purchasing, this resident was reassured by the agent that she would have an automatic right to have 1 dog and 2 with permission. He even pointed to other dogs in the building as demonstration, but he did not mention, or more likely he did not know, about the 10 kilogram size limit. So this resident's 8-year-old dog weighed 15 kilograms and was not welcome. After a legal appeal, the resident and her dog are now settled in, but it was a costly and emotional process that's negatively impacted their bonds with the community. In gathering information and data for the guide, we've also reached out to a diverse range of experts from across the country for their views and advice on apartment living. Contributions have come from fields as diverse as nutrition, sociology, law, and medicine, to name a few. Their insightful contributions range from the large to the small, from the minutiae of doorway widths and the size of laundry facilities, up to accessing neighbourhood services. The list here provides an overview of the range of topics covered, each of which is presented like this one here, as a series of recommendations of what to look for and what to avoid in the search for your new home. Each also provides links to additional resources. So at this point in today's proceedings, we will hear from three of the contributors from this group of experts we're going to cover the topics of energy efficiency, sleep, and community cohesion. So first, on the topic of energy efficiency, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Travis Moore. Travis is Senior Lecturer in the Sustainable Building Innovation Laboratory at the School of Property, Construction and Project Management at RMIT in Melbourne. So I'll hand over to you, Travis.
Thanks, Jasmine. So I guess in recent years, there's been an increasing focus in the residential sector around the importance of energy consumption and performance, both as it relates to the increasing energy bills that households have been receiving, but also the impact that our consumption of energy has on the environment, and the increasing awareness that the performance and energy efficiency of our buildings have on livability and health and well-being. So apartments are slightly different to your traditional detached house or semi-detached buildings in relation to some of the constraints, but also the opportunities that they have to address energy efficiency. So on the constraints side of things, what we see is that apartments are very difficult to change once they're built. If you want to make any changes to the facade, for example, to improve the thermal efficiency of the building envelope, that can be very challenging to do so in terms of needing to go through body corp approvals, and quite often any changes need to be undertaken across the whole apartment development. So what we see is that there's those challenges, but there's also some opportunities as well. So through the use of shared walls, ceilings, floors, these types of things, you can have improved thermal efficiencies between apartments and within the building, which can help to improve thermal comfort and reduce energy consumption. And so there are some benefits to apartments. And in fact, the data over the last couple of years for new apartments compared to detached housing shows that apartments are performing slightly better in terms of the NatHERS rating around Australia. So I think that demonstrates that there are some energy efficiencies there within apartments. But in terms of what to look for, and this is either renting or purchasing, whether it's new or older apartments, I think these things that I'll just quickly touch on now relate to all of those there. But as Jasmine mentioned earlier on, orientation is very important, because you can't change the orientation of your apartment once it's constructed. So thinking about where the windows are, for example, making sure you've got that north-facing windows and an aspect, I think is very important in most parts of Australia, so that you're letting in the sun during the winter months to be able to get that passive heating benefit there. If you're on the east side, you need to think about the sun coming in, particularly in the mornings, into your bedroom, so you might not be having sleep-ins. And if it's on the west side, then you're going to have some of those challenges with those warm summer afternoons where apartments that we've monitored get quite hot, uncomfortably so. So thinking about not only the orientation, but where is it located? Does it have shared walls? Can you take efficiency benefits from apartments on either side, above, below? And if not, what is the building envelope made of? Can you identify what the construction is? Can you improve the thermal efficiencies there somehow? Windows and window frames are quite important. So having a look for things like double glazed windows. We're seeing more low E coating on windows as well, which helps to improve performance. But even if you don't have double glazed windows, or if you're a renter and you can't make those types of changes, there are opportunities now where there's a whole range of new films that have come onto the market in recent years, where you can apply these films and get percentages of improvement up to about 70 or 80% of a standalone double glazed unit for a fraction of the price. So there are some options there to improve things moving forward. In terms of appliances and technologies, these should be replaced across time as they come to the end of their natural life. So do seek out more efficient appliances. A number of these appliances now have smart elements to them. So things like reverse cycle air conditioners, which can sense when you leave the room, so they can cycle down and save save energy consumption there, I think, are very important. But we also need to think about the performance of the building overall as well. So apartments with the shared common spaces can be quite significant contributors of energy consumption. So thinking about the opportunities for improvement there, if they haven't been improved already. So things like LED lighting, sensors or timers in some of those spaces. Does the building have solar, or is there the opportunity to include solar later on? And also, what are the shared facilities in the building? Quite a number of apartments are now constructed with gyms or pools or other shared spaces. And those spaces can be quite energy intensive. So thinking about what the opportunities are there to improve the efficiency of the building equipment more broadly, but also in those spaces. Thanks.
You're on mute, Jasmine.
Thank you very much. So thanks, Jess. I'd like to move on to the topic of getting a good night's sleep in your apartment. So I'd like to introduce Professor Philip de Chazel. Philip is ResMed Chair of Biomedical Engineering at the University of Sydney and a member of the Charles Perkins Centre there at the University of Sydney. So I'll hand over to you, Philip.
Thank you very much, Jasmine, and good evening to everybody. Yeah, getting a good night's sleep. Well, look, there's really two factors to getting a good night's sleep. The first is having good habits, so-called good sleep hygiene habits, which has got nothing to do with your apartment. And the second is having a good environment, which has got everything to do with your apartment. So just briefly on the habit side of things. Well, let's start off. What is the ideal amount of sleep? So for an adult, it's somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. If you're getting less than about kind of 6.5 hours, you're probably getting too little. If you're getting more than about 9.5, you're probably getting a bit too much. But within that sort of range, 7 to 9, it's very much an individual choice, and you kind of should know for yourself what works for you, which may not necessarily work for the next person. Good sleep hygiene habits include things like routine, going up and going to bed at the same time, avoiding caffeinated drinks, ideally after lunchtime, avoiding heavy meals just before bed, and winding down before you go to bed. So, avoid using your laptop, getting too much kind of so-called blue light from screens, and too many kind of mentally stimulating things. The other thing is try and avoid heavy exercise in the hours leading up to bedtime. So no going for kind of marathon runs or having a heavy workout as well. Now the second bit, which relates to the apartments, is the environment. So this is where your apartment can have a big impact. So what's the ideal kind of sleep space look like? Well, firstly, temperature is a big factor. So ideally, your bedroom should be between 16 and 19 degrees. And this can be achieved sort of either just through natural cooling, so by opening the windows, or perhaps using some assistance like fans. Another sort of more energy intensive option is to use AC, but that can be both noisy, expensive, and also can have an effect on the air quality as well, in terms of it often dries the air out. Another aspect to consider is how noisy are the bedrooms. Ideally, you want to minimize that. And by the way, if you're looking to kind of double glaze your apartment for your windows for energy efficiency, there's a nice little side benefit that also has a big impact on the noise as well. So double glazing is very good at minimizing external noise. So you want to consider things like the sound insulation. So in apartments, you're often got neighbors above and below, as well as sort of surrounding you. So you need to consider sort of ceiling and floor sound insulation. Look at the layout of your apartments. As the bedrooms, are the bedrooms kind of backing on to noisy areas such as bedrooms, such as living rooms or kitchens, or noisy teenagers? That's something to consider. Traffic noise, are they at the front or the back of the apartment? And just sort of other general interior noise. Another aspect to consider is the light in the bedroom. You could consider the aspects. So if it's an east-facing bedroom, then you're likely to obviously get light in the morning, and if you're not an early riser, then that can be an issue. So perhaps if you're not an early riser, avoid east-facing bedrooms. Always consider getting good quality window furnishings that provide some sort of light blockout. This can make a big difference both for light as well as for the noise as well. You want to minimize distractions in the bedroom, so ideally no TVs or laptops or even sort of mobile phones in the bedroom. Just have sort of quiet wind down activities happening in the bedroom. Goes without saying, but you need a comfortable bed. It's got to be a bed that's not going to cause you pain when you're sleeping on. Another little tip is turn clocks away from you. So particularly if you're a sort of an anxious sleeper, so don't sit there staring at the clock and expect to be able to fall asleep, because just the kind of knowledge of the time can be enough to keep you open. So turn them away from you. So that's kind of it in terms of what you might look for in an apartment, and I'll hand back to you, Jasmine.
Thanks very much, Philip. It's interesting to remind ourselves of what we need to do with our own lives, as well as what the physical parameters of our apartments are. Thank you for that. But I think I'm going to struggle to miss my afternoon coffee, so I'm still working on that one. Next, I'd like to introduce and change scale somewhat to our final expert speaker, Associate Professor Karen Decker from the College of Design and Social Context at RMIT. Karen is drawing on her knowledge and experience of community capital in apartments to contribute to the guide. Hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So we spoke so far. We spoke a lot about the apartment itself, but there's so much more happening when you buy an apartment or when you move into an apartment as a tenant. And very often a large part of satisfaction with how the house is created by feeling part of a community. And not everyone wants to be part of a community, so have a bit of a think if you do want that or not. If you're a very introverted person and you really don't like you don't like people, try to find an apartment where you don't actually meet anyone when you come home, because often you'll spend time in shared corridors, elevators, and those kind of spaces. I think when you buy or move into an apartment, it's very important to consider that community aspect. So when you're looking to move somewhere, first of all, what do you want? Do you want to be part of a community or not? And then try to find something that fits with that. So there's apartment blocks where people have barbecues together. There's like a rooftop terrace. There's a local little cafe down at the bottom where everybody meets and catches up. Everything looks very neat and tidy. And if that feels right for you, then that may be a good apartment block for you to move into. However, if you just want to come home after a long day, you don't want to kind of stumble over all your neighbors that are having coffees and beers outside. So yeah, there's not a one size fits all, but there are some general rules and things that I found in a lot of my research. And one of the most important things is that the shared spaces, if they look neat and tidy and welcoming, that really affects the social activity that takes place there. So if there's a lot of garbage or hot rubbish left outside, that does not positively affect social networking between neighbors. And however, if there's like green spaces with little seating areas, there's a very high chance that you can have a coffee with a neighbor there, or that if there's a play area for the kids, parents can sit outside and watch their children play and catch up while they do that. So a lot of the physical aspects of apartments should be kind of the shared area should be welcoming if you're looking for community, but also outside of the apartment block. So the street, and is there a public park nearby where you can spend some time outdoors? Is there maybe a Facebook page like there's the Good Karma Network Facebook pages that are really happening everywhere in Australia, where people can help neighbors and ask for help. So before you decide to move anywhere or buy or rent somewhere, have a look at those kinds of things. And also have a look at Airbnb. There may not be a lot of Airbnb happening now, but there are apartment blocks where about 80% is rented out on Airbnb. And if you're looking for community, that's not a good thing. Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a summary. And back to you, Jasmine.
Thank you very much. So thank you to our three experts for sharing some thoughts on the topics that they've contributed to the guide on. Having collected the data from a range of sources and gathered input from experts such as these on 14 different topics, we currently hold quite a large volume of information about buying apartments or moving into apartments. And a lot of the information is intrinsically interlinked. So the needs of families with children, sustainable living practices, and healthy eating, for example, all inform kitchen design. And similarly, energy efficiency, thermal comfort, and sleep, we can see are already intertwined. And the information is not only intertwined, but it's also multi-scalar. So hence information in the guide is divided into 3 scales, those being context, building, and apartment. And the context is in a way the most generic of those scales, with the information being applicable to the vast majority of households. Whereas we see more need for personalising information being necessary at the building and apartment scales. So hence we see the role of the Your Apartment Home Guide as being to compile or synthesise this information to make it as useful as possible for future residents. And to achieve this, the guide asks users to reflect on their own needs, as we've already had introduced in a way by some of the comments from the preceding speakers. It asks such questions as, are you someone who likes to know your neighbours? Do you work from home? Are you a light sleeper or a shift worker? Do you live with pets? Do you have access or mobility requirements? Maybe hobbies or related specific storage requirements associated with hobbies? Is your household likely to change or grow over time? Are you someone who enjoys entertaining or gardening, or is a low impact sustainable lifestyle really important to you? So by asking themselves questions such as these, residents can begin to understand their own needs in more detail and prioritise apartment features for their future home. Articulating their own needs and gaining design knowledge specific to their household can prevent repeating the experiences like those of the informants discussed previously. In the process of preparing the guide, we've developed a series of personas representing different households seeking apartment accommodation. And these, excuse me, these household personas are initially informed by ABS census data on apartment household types. So very quickly, let's meet Jan. She's one of our numerous personas that we've developed. And Jan, she would be particularly interested in the expert advice sections that are included in the guide based about community cohesion, ageing in place, and pets, because they're relevant to her lifestyle. At the building scale, the guide would provide Jan specific guidance on shared outdoor spaces, requirements around car parking, pet rules, costs, and sustainability. At the apartment scale, Jan would be interested in the guidance provided by the document on access and mobility, usability, which would ensure adequate space for her hobbies and her photography meetings and things that she holds, energy efficiency and comfort. So we've gone through this process with a number of different sort of household personas, and drawing from these, the guide focuses on the activities residents perform in and around their homes: sleeping, cooking, eating, dining, working. Homes are the places that people perform both these everyday tasks and special occasion activities, and the language of the guide focuses on accommodating and enabling these desired activities. So the first edition is to include a collection of fact sheets addressing each of the building and apartment specific attributes that we identified, some of which are common to many residents. So we see some being common across those different personas there, while some are more specific. And the user of the guide is directed to the most relevant set of fact sheets for them, based on their answers to the initial questions about their needs. So each of the fact sheets includes information like an introductory rationale of why this is an important topic, some residents' experiences pertinent to the topic, dot-pointed advice on what to look for, and what we're continuing to work on and draw together is successful examples of design outcomes, including example plans and critical minimum dimensions. And so the example shown here is for a family living space. And this example comes from quite a successful apartment design guide from Toronto, Canada, which is one of the international guides that we've looked at that's informing how we're advancing this next stage of the project. So in the fact sheets, we'll draw on successful examples both in Australia and internationally, as has been done here in a couple of shots on a page from the Irish Apartment Design Guide. At the same time as demonstrating successful contemporary design, the guide is cognizant of the fact that it is to be used to assist residents in choosing their Australian apartment home, which is likely already designed, if not built. So we're aware that showing a future resident a shared outdoor play space such as this will not magically make them available as an option for purchase, but by exposing residents to some more aspirational examples, future demand may be influenced. And this is something that we see as another role of the guide in the long term. So thinking forward, after the first edition, one would hope for the second edition, and we're hoping to source support to develop a second edition of the guide, which is an even more interactive format as a sort of an application. So this would offer an increased level of personalisation for users, including the capacity to prioritise their building and apartment attributes, setting what's more important to them than other things, generating essentially a personalised guidance or inspection sheet, and to maybe set deal breakers. So in a way, we're working towards what will hopefully become a sort of a choose your own adventure pathway through selecting an apartment, where we can find a pathway that suits the needs of individual households and try and help them find that pathway to travel along. So at this point, I'd like to invite our 3 expert contributors that we just heard from to join me on the stage, so to speak. And we have some time allocated now for questions and answers. And I'd like to kick it off by asking you a couple of quick questions. And maybe, can I start with Corinne? Can I ask you, and then follow this question through to Traverse and Philip, thinking about your area of expertise, what constitutes a deal breaker? So is there a particular apartment feature which you can either cannot live with or maybe cannot live without?
I think it depends on who you are. So if
for you,
for me personally, I like people. So for me, you know, I would need to live in an apartment where there's an opportunity to meet my neighbors. And also, as a Dutch person, I like talking to my neighbors. And that doesn't mean I want to do that all the time. I want to be able to withdraw and retreat and, you know, do my meditation and yoga on my own. But I also want to have that opportunity to catch up with other people, because I think when you live in an apartment block and there's a little bit of irritation about the dog next door that's barking, or somebody that is playing loud music late at night. it's so much easier to have a little bit of a chat about that when you know people. Um, so yeah, for me, knowing neighbors is very important personally. So for me, but also as a social capital researcher, the shared spaces have to to look welcoming, and that means they're clean. There's no hot rubbish. The materials that are used are beautiful. Ideally, there's a couple of plants. Good materials are used, but also there's enough space to meet. So maybe a rooftop terrace with plants and seating areas, those kinds of things. That will be really important for me. And if there's no such thing, if there's only, you have to kind of crawl past the garbage bins and then there's your front door and you have to step over other people's shoes, that wouldn't be my kind of thing. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks. I wonder, Travis, the same question to you maybe. So as with all your knowledge around energy efficiency in building, what's a deal breaker for you?
Yeah, so I'd be looking for a NatHERS performance rating significantly beyond the minimum current 6-star. So I'd be looking for something 7.5 star and above, if possible. I know that's probably going to limit your options somewhat, but the better performing the building envelope is to begin with, the more energy efficient it's going to be, the more insulated the internal walls are likely to be as well. So some of those issues about the barking dog that Corinne just mentioned might resolve themselves naturally, but also that orientation. So making sure it's north facing, lots of natural light, making sure that it wasn't the east or west windows is what I would personally look for.
And it's interesting how, as we hear from you, we see that interconnection again of the different issues and how we might perceive them as different challenges in apartment building, but they're so very interconnected. So I might ask the same question of Philip, if that's okay. What's a deal breaker for you in terms of maybe choosing an apartment, given your area of expertise?
Thanks, Jasmine. Oh, for me, it's clearly noise. So you don't want a noisy apartment. It's going to impact on many aspects of your life, but particularly on your sleep. Particularly modern living where it's hard enough to find enough time to get a good sleep. If you're kind of dealing with noise, it makes it even more challenging. So it can be hard to assess a place before you've moved into it. So as if you can go and see the place at a variety of times during the day or during the week, go early in the morning to see if early morning traffic noise is a problem. Go late at night if you possibly can to see if there's loud noise from neighbours or surrounding houses or whatever, or just gather as much data as you can on it. I mean, because unfortunately, once you've moved in, there's probably relatively little you can do to kind of change the noise. So you kind of want to get it right, right from the get-go if you possibly can. You can do some things like, I guess, if it's single glazed, change to double glazed, or you might be able to improve the sound insulation, but they're all expensive and intrusive things to have to do.
Okay, so it's really important, this understanding. I think that something we're trying to get through in the guide is what we can influence after buying or after moving in, and what we can't is also something really important for us to acknowledge, I think, when we're looking at places. Thank you everybody for your contributions there. I might ask Lisa, who's managing the questions coming in, how we're going, and if you have any questions for the panelists.
Thanks, Jasmine. So yes, we do have some questions coming in. I will just start with an amusing comment from Michael, who I guess was commenting on Philip's discussion of sleep, and he felt a big factor for sleep quality that wasn't mentioned was whom, if anyone, you sleep with. We might just leave that one there though. So I guess to all panelists, when we've got a question here, What's the easiest way to work out orientation? Compass on a mobile phone?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can jump onto Google Maps and use that, or just one of the features on your phone.
I'll just throw a comment in there that in terms of the opens that we attended, a vast majority of the documents provided at opens didn't include a North Point, so they had no indication of orientation. A number of, say for example in Adelaide, because Adelaide people generally perceive, oh, the hills are in the east, one agent just went, when I said, oh, what's the orientation? Well, the hills are in the east. You know, that's very general. And plans that had North Points marked, some of them were up to 125 degrees out. So they're actually, you know, just whacked on by someone without truly checking. So even if there is a North Point on your plans that you've been given, take a compass with you, whether it be on your phone or whatever device you have. You do get a strange look from real estate agents when you walk in. The first thing you do is look at your compass, but do it anyway.
Sorry, can I just make one comment, as given my engineering background, is just be a little wary of using compasses in a building, because there might be metal that's influencing the direction. So perhaps the phone might be a more reliable option.
Okay, so also from Angela was, when buying an apartment, can a building inspector advise on the quality of the insulation?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get building inspectors, or you can get energy efficiency certification experts who can comment on the sustainability elements of the building, including the insulation. And it might even be in the paperwork or the documentation as it relates to the building that you would get when seeking to purchase the building.
Okay, so Jasmine, we have a couple of questions about musical instruments. People that have either found that they haven't been able to practice in their homes, or wanting to know, you know, generally what the rules are around use of musical instruments in apartment buildings.
I think one of the important things to remember when we ask about general rules in apartment buildings is that our strata legislation differs in every state. So we're talking across states here at the moment, but things like pet rules, smoking rules even, and other things vary between New South Wales and Victoria and other states as well. In terms of noise, it's just perceived with the term of nuisance, and really there's the question of what are the rules, and then there's the question of how you get along with your neighbours and how you want that relationship to persist over time, and you know how you go about avoiding any damage to that relationship. So look, if you really want to, well, of course we really want to, a really good source of information nationally, and I hate to be sort of recommending a semi-commercial entity, but Look Up Strata is a really, really useful sort of notice board, updating of information on the rules in stratas across different states, and you can search by state what the different rules are, and discussions and commentary, questions people have asked that have been answered. So that's a really good resource. But there is no specific rules in terms of musical instruments in particular. They just fall within the realm of noise. So increasingly, I know a number of people who have their children practice musical instruments in their storage cages in their basements of their buildings, because that's where it's not annoying the neighbours. And I know others who greatly appreciate the fine music coming from their neighbours, and you know they have, you know, a bit of a negotiation of when's the best time of day for the person next door to be practicing their cello, so that it can be enjoyed by their neighbours rather than be seen as problematic. Karen, I wonder if you would like to add to this issue of musical instruments from your experiences.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. I think it's all about finding that balance between doing what you want to do and yeah, staying friends with your neighbors. And I don't think you should be forced to play an instrument in the basement. Yeah, but yeah, it's all about enjoying something that somebody else is doing and taking into consideration, you know, that other people may have different rhythms. So somebody was talking about a djembe, and I can imagine that, you know, if you practice your djembe, it can be quite calming if you're a good player. But if you're still learning, and the neighbor is trying to write a PhD thesis, that may be a bit hard to combine. So it's all about finding that tender balance between, yeah, the delicate balance between what you want and what they want. And that's why it's so good to have a bit of, to be able to have a conversation. I used to live in an apartment block, and my neighbors downstairs were smokers, and I'm not a smoker. And the smoke came into my apartment. I didn't like that. So we kind of negotiated that they would smoke not on their balcony, but a little bit further away, so that the smoke wouldn't come. So we created this little smoking corner in the shared garden, and you know, they just hung out there when they wanted to smoke, and there was a little cover. So we found a solution together. And I think it's the same with the musical instruments and the dogs and, you know, whatever. I mean, if the dog next door is barking, you may want to offer that they bring the dog to you during the day when they go out for work or something like that, if that helps. So yeah, it's about having those conversations, and that they can be hard, you know, because it really comes into your private space. So yeah, higher communication skills can be required if you live in an apartment building. Yeah, and usually there's some kind of help available if you really can't, you know, find some kind of agreement about the djembe, the dog, or the smoking or whatever. There's somebody that can help and be a mediator between you. And in the worst case, you have to move somewhere else, but that's not what you want. You know, you want to stay there for a longer time. Yeah.
Okay, so Emma asks, does the guide include information on identifying mould or the conditions that cause mould to grow? Mould is a big issue for occupants and can be hard to detect without an understanding of ventilation and sunlight.
I'm just watching to see if anybody jumps in there. Shall I respond to that? Look, Emma, we won't be having a section specifically on mould, but we have some things around health generally. But what I would say around sort of identifying mould is that, again, this comes back to your building inspector. So what we are doing in the guide is looking at what sort of things, helping people understand what sort of things your building inspector and your legal advisors can help you understand. And ensuring that you have the knowledge that who's meant to help you with that, and to be able to seek that advice, as opposed to providing that advice and sort of training you as a potential resident to identify it yourself. I hope that begins to answer the question, or Lisa, you might want to add something there.
Sure. Well, I think that we will be looking next week in more detail at the issues around orientation as they relate specifically to apartment design and location of rooms and things like that. So I think certainly that will be addressed in the guide as well. You will get that indication of, you know, the sun's impact on your building. And so I think if you can understand that, you will then know the areas that would be at risk of mould growth. All right, I'm mindful we haven't got too much longer. There's a comment here, have you considered creating a rating system? That's probably one for you, Jasmine.
I'd say it's probably one for Peter. Is Peter speaking, or he's completely hidden in the background?
I can speak, yeah. What was, sorry, just missed that one.
The question is, have you considered creating a rating system?
A rating system? Yeah, I think that might be a sort of a version 2 issue, Jasmine. Yeah, I think the problem with the rating system is one person's poison could be another person's medicine. So pretty hard to end up with, you know, one number for all apartments. But I'm hoping that we can give people enough information that they can create their own rating system, I guess, in terms of what they're looking at. And just while I've got the microphone, that one of the real issues with mold is sort of ventilation. So both orientation and ventilation. So for instance, New Zealand's now got a piece of rental legislation that won't let you get a residential lease on a property without a operating ventilation fan in a bathroom that pushes air to, you know, to external areas. So that is a real issue for mold. So that ventilation is pretty important. Okay, I'm going to get out of the way again, but thank you for the question. Sorry, someone just banged on the door in the lecture theatre. We got the studio in, thinking they have a class in here at the moment, which is slightly problematic.
I'll leave you with that one. Okay, we've got a couple more questions. I'm just trying to get through. We've got a few more. Is there information about strata ownership? What is common property and what is private property?
Okay, this is another one of the issues that varies across states. And one of the difficulties in a way of developing a guide is making sure it's as relevant to as many people in Australia as possible. And because we're trying to focus on how we live in apartments and trying to sort of focus on how we can assist residents with finding something that's most appropriate to the functions they perform in their daily life. We're not focusing specifically on that understanding of what's the difference between strata ownership. However, I'll mention that in our expert advice, we do have some input from one of the leading experts on governance in strata buildings, which is Associate Professor Hazel Easthope, has contributed to the expert section and provided some really useful links from that. But that definition between what is common and what is private property within your strata titling and the understanding of the dualistic nature of a strata title is a really important thing for people to understand. So we raise that in the guide. But the actual definition between private and common varies with jurisdictions. And say, for example, it even varies with changes in legislation within a single jurisdiction. So something that was strata titled before, I believe it was 1978 in South Australia, you own a certain amount of the wall, whereas something that was strata titled after 1978, you own a different portion of the wall. So the capacity for our guide to cover all those variations that exist in historic legislation is a bit of a challenge, but we do provide direction of where to find those answers. And of course, those answers change with time as new rulings are made all the time through residential tenancy and other courts. A lot of the legal stuff around strata and any form of ownership or anything within our legal system, which is based on precedent, continues to change. So what we aim to do is to send you to the right places to get a contemporary answer. And I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've just got time probably for one more. It says, what is a good minimum size for a bedroom shared by 2 people?
Sounds like a good one for me to perhaps answer. The minimum size is big enough to have your bed and what other furniture you want in the room and not trip over each other. I mean, it really depends on individual preferences. Like if you've got a king size bed, then you clearly need a bigger room. But if you're happy with double bed or even bunk beds, then you can have a much smaller room. So yeah, I mean, I guess the main thing is that you don't want to be climbing over the top of each other. If you're getting up in the middle of the night, you need enough space to be able to kind of move around comfortably. So yeah, I guess it goes back to the size of your furniture.
Yeah, and I think I would also add that it's something that we will discuss further in next week's event. and also it will be discussed in detail in the guide. But I think considering your personal circumstances, so do you need to have a desk in your room? Do you, as Philip said, what size bed do you use? I think the minimum sort of size that we tend to work with in Australia is around the 2.7 by 3 metres. But really, it does come down to what your actual needs are. And I think this year we've all had to live quite differently in our homes than we imagined we would. And so, I think it's being mindful of that things can change quite rapidly. So, being prepared to go with that.
And I think it comes back as well to the idea that what we're trying to do is think about how much space and what we need to perform certain activities or functions within our spaces. So what we might call a bedroom might actually perform multiple functions at different times of the day, and therefore be of a different size or proportion than if it's simply just a bedroom. And just using the bedroom as an example, but yeah, looking at those different types of functions rather than the specific spaces themselves.
Jasmine, I think we've got
solutions for different people.
Probably time for one very quick other question. Maintenance costs and relationship to other owners is important for good life in apartments, is a comment that we have. So how can people find out about what the maintenance costs of their apartment building might be?
Maintenance costs are generally, well, they are covered by the body corporate, which, of course, with different legislation in different states, it's a body corporate in one state, it's an owners corporation in another state, it's all different names. But the maintenance costs of the common property is managed by that entity of which you as an owner are a member. As a renter, you're not a member of that entity, your landlord is. And this is one of the challenges, I think, of buildings that are dominated by renters in the Australian legislative context, is that renters have very little say of what goes on in their building. And I think that's very problematic, and hopefully we'll see that change moving forward. But maintenance costs, the strata levies have to be disclosed at the time of purchase. And when you get a sale contract as a potential owner, you see some years of financial history of the strata organisation, and you should look at those in detail to examine how much of a sinking fund is there, what money is available for the building to deal with major maintenance issues coming up further. And we have the input into the guide from, as I said, Hazel Easthope, but also Nicole Johnson, who deals with building defects and maintenance issues, are included in the guide as well. So we can never really predict what maintenance costs are going to be, but we can certainly find out at the time of purchase what the current strata levies are.
Okay, I am mindful of time, so we do need to wrap up now. Firstly, I'd like to thank our expert guests for your input today, and also in the guide. It's really provided some interesting information for us to work with. I'd like to thank everyone for your attendance and input into the event today. I'd like to invite you, should you be interested, to register for next Monday's event, Hacking an Apartment Design, which will put some common apartment designs to the test in a bit more of a hands-on way. Additionally, on the 26th of November, the Henry Halloran Lecture will be delivered by Ian Mulhern, who's the Executive Director and Chief Economist of Renewing the Centre at the Tony Blair Institute in London. And he'll be discussing housing policy and supply in more detail, should you be interested in that. So thank you, everyone, and good evening.